Happy Friday to everybody, and welcome to Culturally Appropriate. I am obviously your host, Jerod Hollyfield. So we have a great show lined up for you today, as always. First, we're going to talk to Nicole Chellino, who is a Durham, North Carolina-based jewelry designer and auctioneer. Next, we're going to talk about Alex Garland's new movie, Civil War, which I wrote a review of in this morning's edition of The Pamphleteer. And as always, we are going to talk about our weekly film rundown, which Civil War is a main part of, but there's also a lot of other really great offerings at the Belcourt and in wide release this week. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce Nicole.
Hi, thanks for having
Nicole,
me.
how's it going?
Great, I'm glad it's Friday.
So
Happy-
I'm doing this kind of like small business artisan series by accident on the show. Last week we had Rod Ledbetter, who runs a lamp shop where he does a lot of lamp repairs and restores antique lamps. And obviously today we've got you and your love of antique jewelry to talk about. So I don't really know how this happened, but I'm very happy that it did. So let us know, because I know you've got a very interesting background. You first trained to be an elementary school teacher, as I understand it.
That's correct. I have a Master of Arts in Teaching, and I taught fourth grade. I writing, reading, history. I taught kindergarten, and I taught preschool.
So how does one go from being an elementary school teacher to an auctioneer and jewelry designer? What is that career path like?
I think abandoning this concept of a linear path is really the best way to describe that. An article just came out in Entrepreneur about this concept of careers being forced on people, being pushed on people. And I do think that everybody is on their own path. And for me, it has just been a lot of experimentation, a lot of meditation, a lot of discovery, taking classes and being really tenacious with finding people to work under, finding people to talk to, finding people to learn from, and being your own best teacher.
So which came first, your desire to be an elementary school teacher or your love of jewelry?
Oh, love of jewelry. Yeah. My aunt works for a wholesale company and she has been with them for 30 years. So I grew up going to her house and looking at some items that my grandmother and my aunt would collect for a while. They just traveled around the country and collected antiques. And but my love of that jewelry was there was always a story. My grandmother passed when I was very young, and my aunt and I both loved jewelry. I love the arts. My mom put me in painting classes because I was a nerdy little artistic kid. And it was really a connection for us, and it was a family history, and it was this a tangible sentiment that we could share, and that sentiment really stuck with me. I love the artistry of jewelry, but the story of jewelry is what keeps me invested in the industry. And yeah, I love as an auctioneer, I love being able to hear those family stories and hear those histories from the people that I serve. So that was part of what spurred me to take the auctioneer class as well.
So there seems to be, obviously, antiques have always been a major part of American culture, much a part of decor and jewelry and all of those industries. But it seems like there's suddenly this sort of pushback for people in our generation and in Gen Z that they're embracing antiques in ways maybe other generations hadn't until their stuff became antique. So what do you think is behind that?
I think part of that is actually a cultural dialogue between different generations. If you hear a lot of auctioneers who are in the boomer generation, they make a lot of wild assumptions about our generation and Gen Z, and saying that we don't want old things, which is not true based on buying patterns and based on shopping patterns. Another portion of it is that I think that because millennials are able to pare back their collections, we don't have that same. I want to collect everything. My household needs to have this full flatware set. It needs to have this full dishware set. Um, a lot of folks in our generation and in Gen Z, they choose a category to collect and they focus on that category, and they stay in one or two categories. Specifically for jewelry, Because the gold prices are so high right now, I just looked before we hopped on, and on Kitco we were at 2,367 approximate dollars for a troy ounce of pure gold. So what's happening is because buyers are buying such vast quantities of gold from estates and folks who are, de-investing or unfortunately passing away, um, the value of antiques and the value of vintage jewelry are going up because a lot of these items are.
So a little bit off topic from what you're saying, but I have noticed, I was reading yesterday kind of in preparation for the interview, that Costco is just selling gold bars now.
Yeah,
So there seems to be this kind of correlation, obviously, between downturns in the economy when the prices of precious metals go up, and also theft. But at the same time, jewelry theft also tends to increase, just like copper theft does
yep,
in times of economic uncertainty. I know a few years ago, about 10 years ago, my family had a break in and all of our jewelry was stolen. And a lot of it we found out was melted down later or sold off. So,
yeah.
what can people do to prevent that? I mean, if somebody obviously does get into your house after alarms and dogs and shotguns and everything else, I mean, is there anything that people can do where you see these trends where they're careless with their jewelry whenever there's a situation like this?
Yeah, and I have a couple practical tips for folks. If it's in your budget to get a safe, if your collection is at a certain point, I always encourage people to have a safe and be mindful of, you know, don't tell people that you have a safe. Don't tell people where it's hidden in your home. Make sure that it is hidden in your home. Another thing that you can do is to get an appraisal done on your collection. Appraisals, you have to do your research on who you are getting your appraisal from. There are appraisals for replacement value, and there are fair market appraisals if you were to try and sell your pieces on the secondary market. Um, just because you have that replacement budget doesn't mean that you'll be able to actually get those pieces together with the right jeweler to get those. Some things cannot be replicated. But if you are aware of any precious metal buyers in your area, in the state of North Carolina, under Chapter 66 of the General Statutes, you have to get a precious metal buyer permit. So you could go to a place that advertises as only buying gold. A lot of jewelers will buy gold as a secondary practice for their business. I don't recommend selling your gold to a jeweler, but if you've had a break-in in your home, and you have that documentation, photo documentation of your collection, the police will help you. And then the metal buyers, by law, they're supposed to hold items for 14 days before they're melted. So unfortunately, one of your first steps after a break-in is to go to these places and pass over your documentation. That way they can look out for it. I have, as my work as a precious metal buyer, I have helped folks reacquire their stolen goods. If you have access to a precious metal buyer that has those processes in place and works with their team closely, like my old company did, then you can recover stolen items. It's just tricky. It's hard.
I know in Tennessee, like the pawn shop lobby is really, really strong. And because we have so many tourist hubs all throughout the state, I mean, pawn shops in Sevierville and the Smoky Mountain area are just like rife, and it's such a transactional place and such a transitory place. A lot of this stuff goes through, but that's what I've heard from a lot of people in our state, that the pawn shops make it very difficult for people to get their stuff back because they want to make sure that they absolve themselves of any wrongdoing. And the lobby is very strong with our lawmakers here, which is an unfortunate situation. I don't know how it is in North Carolina. It sounds like you have a little bit more clear cut
A
law
little
there.
bit. I mean, just because the laws are in place doesn't mean that people always abide by them, which is really unfortunate. I choose to be, you know, probably pretty painfully honest with my clients and with the people I choose to work with because that's how I choose to do business. In jewelry, there are quite a few jewelers that are older, and the lineage of passing on jewelry making is I don't want to say that it's dying out, but it has significantly changed. The apprenticeship model in the US does not work. It's not something that happens anymore, unless you're really lucky and tenacious. Uh, but there are quite a few jewelers who are used to that pre-internet day, kind of similar to what would happen if you went to a mechanic to work on your car and you didn't know anything about your car. You're putting a lot of trust in that relationship for someone to do the right thing. And unfortunately, there are a lot of great jewelers in my area that are trustworthy, they're skilled, they're honest. And unfortunately, there are others who are not. So you just have to do your due diligence and you have to go with your gut as far as how much you want to invest in your pieces and how much you want to trust a business.
So something that really surprised me in our conversations before this interview were just all of the continuing education that a jeweler has to go through, or somebody that's in this industry has to go through. You just don't like suddenly decide to open up a jewelry shop like you would a frozen yogurt place. So what is that education like to get your certifications, your licenses, to build that reputation?
Yeah, it really depends on what you want to focus on. It depends on how thorough you want to be. For myself, I have a background in tech, and so it was a pretty seamless path for me to pick up a CAD program and to dive into that. Taking classes as far as your hand skills, uh, there are some schools, there are some accredited universities where you can get benching, certificates. There is a Bench Jewelers Association where you can be accredited through them. There are trade schools, like in Tennessee, the New Approach School is over there, and they have rolling classes. The Gemologist Institute of America is GIA, and they also have benching classes, but they have gemology classes. And a gemologist degree is a whole undertaking. I have taken diamond grading, and I still need to take the diamond grading lab because my focus is antique cut diamonds. Because I have worked in retail, I understand the lab grown market, which I'm happy to talk about. It's a really interesting twist in the jewelry industry right now. But every path has a whole set of take this class, have this certification. If you want to be a gemologist and do appraisals, you really should get a graduate gemologist degree. You'll go through pearls, you'll go through colored stones, gem ID, diamond grading. If you want to do benching, there's a little bit of a difference in path depending on what you want to do. A lot of folks in the industry will say, and it is true to some degree, that it's better to be a jeweler's kid or come from a jewelry family because the expense in tools and your materials is it's a hefty expense. It's not a casual hobby unless you like to be a hobbyist. There's no shame in that either.
So there seems to be this tension, and and I'm going to say tension, I mean a good tension between your love of antique jewelry and preserving the past and preserving rings, preserving some of this actual jewelry from a certain time period. I know my wedding band, which I can't wear. We'll talk about that in a second, some more practical stuff. But my wedding band is from Australia in the 1920s, and I can't really get it modified without getting the engraving off or damaging that. So preserving these old pieces, but also, as you're saying, sort of putting a new twist on them, new designs with antique gems. So, and I think we can pull up a couple. Geneva showed them a little earlier in the show, but some of the actual jewelry that you've designed, how do you negotiate that tension between preserving the past and sort of reformatting and revising these antique stones for a new twist or more contemporary trends?
Yeah, that is a great question. Neither of the examples that I have here are explicitly antique techniques. I mean, to make a chain is an old technique. We had to make chains and links by hand, so technically that's an antique technique, but that's more of a skills acquisition. For me, there are quite a few designers that you can find on Instagram as folks want to research. Um, I find that there's always a toss up in when something should be repaired and when something should be, let's call it modernized, let's call it re-energized. Um, there is a huge difference. I did apprentice in a repair shop, in a jewelry repair shop, and there is a huge difference in the skill set for jewelry repair and modern benching, stone setting. I'm making you an engagement ring. So for folks who are interested in techniques that are preserving antiques and preserving vintage pieces, I highly recommend finding someone who specializes in repair. Here in Raleigh, North Carolina, my benching teacher is a man named Scott Eddy. He is from a jewelry family. His uncle had a manufacturing company in Brooklyn, and he started benching when he was 13. He is a wizard. I've seen him fix so many things that your average jeweler, unfortunately, would pass. And 9 times out of 10, when you find a repair shop, you'll get a better price on a repair because that is their specialty, and they want to move through these repairs quickly, and they will outsource their skills to what you would call a high-end jeweler. Um, a lot of the general sentiment in the secondary market or in the retail market is, and the caveat of this is historically, before your average person, we'll say the middle class, your average shopper could access jewelry really like the mid to late 1800s. The commercialization of jewelry is not old at all. We're talking like the 1880s. So before that, if you were royal, if you were in the aristocracy, if you had a lot of money, these families would take collections of precious metals and precious gemstones, semi-precious gemstones, pearls, and they would remake them for each generation. So where we are as far as, preserving what really isn't that long of a history, I tend to be in the camp that if you have a stone and you like that stone, and it is an old stone, uh, if you want to pull that stone and put it into something new that fits your taste, jewelry is fashion. Fashion changes. That's why when you see something from the 80s, you're like, ooh, that's a very specific look. But as we see now, 90s trends are coming back, and 90s jewelry's trends are coming back. People are wearing door knocker earrings. They're wearing a lot of geometric designs. They have the mob wife aesthetic, which is really just saying 90s gold. Um, I think that everybody needs. I mean, for me, it's an industry where I can research. I look at Portuguese benchmaking trends. I look at South American trends with emeralds. I look at Saudi jewelry. You can get as specific as you want to of the history of what you have, especially if we're talking about 1920s Australian pieces. Um, and you just have to make a judgment call. Do I want to keep it as it is, or is there something that I can change to make it fit my life?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something I think that a lot of people are really negotiating in this era of forced obsolescence. Rod last week talked about people bringing him IKEA lamps, and what he would charge to fix those is just way, 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 way higher than what it would just cost to replace the thing. And I think that we do kind of have that similar bent in jewelry where there's a lot of cheaply made stuff. I wanted to talk a little bit about the ethics of jewelry, because this is something that I think going back to like the college activist days and the movie Blood Diamond, people talk about, but we're kind of looking at it now from two sectors. We wouldn't think of jewelry as like having some of the same issues as media does, but it really does, because on one hand you have ethically sourced diamonds, similar to like fair trade coffee and some of these other products. But then, as you were talking about, we don't necessarily have AI text like we do in journalism, but you're talking about lab grown stones, right? You're talking about how geology and the sciences have sort of intervened and maybe in some ways changed the landscape of gems and their values. So could you talk about both of those ethical issues that are really impacting your trade right now?
Yeah. I have two separate points to make on that. And what is interesting as far as talking about AI and written media, um, I can take a stamp. Just because I have tattoos doesn't mean I was born with them. And that's something for people to think about with their jewelry. If we look at a ring and it has a hand engraved date in it, we can make a general assumption that that was engraved during that year that is engraved into that piece. But fakes happen all the time. I can take a 925 stamp and stamp something that's silver plated, and someone could push that into the market. That's not something that I do because that's a lie. It's unethical. It's wrong. It's theft. But it does happen all the time. If someone approaches you in a gas station, and this does happen all the time, they'll say, "Oh, I have this 18 karat necklace. Can you buy me gas for this necklace?" It's not going to have gold in it. Um, there are, unfortunately, because metal is a very, very wonderful and malleable material, people can take other people's marks out of jewelry, and they do it frequently. So the inverse, just because something is stamped something doesn't mean that that person made it. So I always encourage people to be really, really particular and really judicious about when they're accepting something as an antique or when they're accepting something as made by a person, because unfortunately there are people out there who lie. They steal other people's work. The other side of that is, as far as, and this is why I bring up Stoned by Aja Rodin so much. She wrote about the history of humans' relationship with jewelry, our obsession with jewelry. She has great chapters about the diamond scandal with Marie Antoinette. She talks about the De Beers Corporation. Some people call it our cartel. We have the ability, and as far as diamonds go, diamonds are incredibly common. If they weren't common, you wouldn't see them everywhere. We have diamond studs, we have diamond tennis bracelets, we have diamond engagement rings. The value of a diamond from the rough, raw octahedron is what humans do to diamonds. So now we're at a place where, with a lab grown diamond, we have taken the human engineering. When we started faceting gemstones, we started with the rose cut, and then we moved through the old mine cut, we moved through the old Euro cut. Then, over time, we perfected the modern round brilliant cut, where it's follows a mathematical formula. It has a set number of facets. It is the perfect diamond cut. When we take that a step further, that means that we are making that stone itself. GIA loves this analogy of ice. We can go up to a glacier and chip ice from the glacier, or we can go to the ice machine, the refrigerator. I am not specifically against lab grown stones. And if we compare them to EV cars, there's always going to be an environmental impact. And what we had with the Kimberly process in order to keep down, these blood diamonds. Unfortunately, anytime there are mined diamonds, there will be theft, and there will be harm. Environmental harm in earth open pit mining is impactful. I mean, it's substantial. But there's an interesting play as far as where people want to sit in the market. And you spoke about Costco earlier. I'm connected to a lady who does the diamond buying for Costco, and you can get a great deal on a diamond from Costco. It's just a matter of how much you want to search, what you can get access to as far as your understanding. If you are looking for the perfect diamond, you can get a really great price that is easy on your pocket, which is also a little bit of history trivia as far as why we spend so much money on diamonds in the retail market. But if you want the perfect diamond and you want a round diamond, you should get a lab grown. The only difference between a natural cut diamond and a lab grown diamond is where it is grown and how much of that human interaction has been put into the stone. Chemically, they're the same. It's still a carbon-based stone. It's still formed with high pressure, high temperature. It's just that humans form them in a lab. I love antique cut stones because there's the history of humans having rudimentary tools, cutting them by candlelight before we had incandescent lights, and they have a historical value. So if you want something that is unique and you want something that, is passed through your family, or something that is going to have a different value in the market in the next 5 years, then you should look at a natural and an antique cut. But it really depends on what you want. And the other fun thing is that diamonds are not forever. That is a lie. Diamonds convert back to graphite over time. It probably won't happen in your lifetime, not going to happen to a diamond that you have on your hand. but they're not forever.
So some people love jewelry, some people don't like it. I don't like having a ring around my finger, which my wife is not super happy about, but I can't do it even though I really admire my ring. Like if I had to wear an engagement ring, I don't know that I could have done it. But
Yeah.
you've got some really great tips. Because I live a fairly rural lifestyle. My wife works on a farm. We have property and chickens and all of that, and we have these lovely antique rings that at least she wears. And you've given us some really good advice in order to sort of preserve and take care of the jewelry while also still being able to get enjoyment out of it. And one of the things that I've had some discussion with my wife about is your S rule in
Yeah.
terms of when you should wear your ring and when you shouldn't. Because I remember my grandfather, he didn't take his ring off. Like he was buried with the ring. I don't think he took it off like 26 years that I was alive by the time that he passed away. And I think my grandparents were the same way. I don't think my parents have ever taken their rings off except for if they're in the hospital or something like that.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about some jewelry care and this wonderful S rule that I'd never heard before? I don't know if you came up with the S rule. Was that your doing
I made
or
it up. Yeah.
you made it up? Okay.
Yeah, because I think a lot about jewelry as fashion, but I think even more about jewelry as function and as a vehicle for sentiment. So in the example of your parents, if they have a plain gold band that it's gold, 14, 18 karat, whatever, it doesn't matter what it's alloyed with, um, you can feasibly wear it every day and never take it off. I encourage people, if you have a ring that has no stones in it, take it off anyways, even if you're taking it off once a week, because I have had quite a few people who never take their rings off and then I've had to cut them off. You don't want to get yourself in a medical situation where you're having a surgery or you have broken your finger and then your finger has grown around your ring. Um, 9 times out of 10, if you cut a ring off, you can, as long as you find a competent repair person, you can close the ring back up, you can size it up, and it will fit you. As far as anything that has gemstones or any kind of a historical value, the S rule is, and this is something that I do. Any verb that starts with S, you should not wear your jewelry. Your jewelry is the last thing that you put on before you leave the house and the first thing that you take off when you get home. So the S's are swimming, sweating, swimming mainly because the chlorine will eat into the base alloys in your rings. If you have white gold and it has nickel in it, I have seen some folks who do their hot tub time with their jewelry on, and the metal will literally crumble. So chlorine and a lot of metals don't mix. Swimming, sweating, showering, don't work out in your jewelry. Unfortunately, sex. If you're in bed sleeping, don't sleep with your jewelry on. I mean, if you look at it, metal has a memory, which is one of the amazing qualities about metal on its molecular baseline as an element. If you have a prong that holds a stone in place, if you think about it, it's like a little metal finger. I have seen some rings where if you don't get your prongs checked, and if you're scrubbing it with a toothbrush, you could even take a bristle on a soft toothbrush and pull a prong open, even though it has that memory and we've conditioned it to go there. I've had a lot of doctors who wash their hands a lot, and that does damage over time. You can wash your diamonds. Now, diamonds and other gemstones are different, right? Opals are soft. Anything that's a soft stone, your opals, your emeralds, anything that's soft, pearls, you don't want to use an ultrasonic. Anybody that is competent in jewelry is not going to put these in an ultrasonic for you. And if they are, they're going to know how to do it quickly and how to do it mindfully. If you have a diamond, whether it's a colored diamond or a colorless diamond, you can take a soft toothbrush and use a little bit of Dawn and warm dish soap and scrub it up. Diamonds are attracted to grease, so you get fingerprints on them. You get, your grease from your hair touching your face. Lotion, if you're a lotion user, that's going to impact your diamond's appearance over time. The other thing to keep in mind is as far as your jewelry, and I love that you brought up that you live your rural lifestyle. I had a client a couple months ago. He was gardening and he had his ring on and he was planting his winter flowers, and the ring grew up with a plant because he lost the ring when he was planting and it grew up. So if that ever happens to you, you hopefully you can find someone in your area to get a metal detector out. I have found that a lot of people can find metal detectors and they'll recover their jewelry. But you want to make sure that if you are really attached to something, you want to limit, unfortunately, you want to limit how much damage you're exposing to it. I have what I call the honeymoon ring. My husband and I went to Europe for a month for our honeymoon, and I just got this 9 carat, two toned. It's just a band. And I hiked the Alps in it. I swam past George Clooney's villa in Lake Como with it. I was not distressed about it. So if you have a situation where, you want to go out and live your life and live an active lifestyle, just get a band that you don't have as high of a sentiment on as opposed to your good stuff, your real stuff.
Well, now that I know you created the S rule, that leads me into my next question. That it seems like a very teacherly thing for you to do. So I'm interested in what drew you to education in the first place, why you got out, and how the skills that you learned training to be a teacher affect your jewelry practice.
Yeah, that's a great question. I just was young and I grew up in the woods and I just didn't get an opportunity to explore a lot. I think that some people, my mom dated this guy who when he was a kid, he wanted to be a dentist, and he grew up and he became a dentist, and he is still a dentist. And that is not me. I
Was he
just
the elf from Rudolph? Like what?
it would sound like my mom to date someone like that. So yeah, I'm gonna go with that. But for me, I've had things that I've always loved, but I didn't necessarily have the courage, and I didn't have the maturity, and I didn't have the clarity of mind to get into them. So one thing when you're working in jewelry, you're working with high dollar items. You have to be able to build trust. You have to be really sharp. Um, I would say that, as a kid, my mom always said that I had a teacher way about me. I would corral the kids in our neighborhood and get them to play little games, and I loved teaching. I had a lot of issues with the American education system that I won't get into now, which is part of my transition out. And part of it is that I choose, and I've always decided to live my life where if opportunities are presented to me, then I will move on them. And I think that level of risk and that level of reaching out is not for everyone. And the transition for me getting to jewelry, and part of where it actually works for me because I took my auctioneer's class before I decided to really hone in on jewelry, and I went about this a very meticulous way. I got a job with a precious metal buyer, and I worked at a desk, and I wanted to learn about the items that I was looking at. Whenever you work as a metal buyer, you get all kinds of collections that come in. But when I was in my auctioneer school, I saw all these folks who they wanted to be auctioneers and they wanted to auction everything. And for me, I always feel better when I can really root into a topic, when I can really specialize in an area, and when it's something where if I love it, it's not my job to sell it. It's just something that I love that I can share. So for me, I like to help people preserve their items. When you work in repair, so many people don't understand general care because if you go to certain corporate retail jewelry stores, they have their own ways of selling you on jewelry and selling you on their cleaning kits. So the lack of education around how do I take care of this? What is this thing? What is the function of this thing? Um, those are nerdy ways that I just can't help but be, and it just fits with jewelry for me.
I did want to point out, I think Geneva's got it loaded in the chamber here. You wrote a really great essay about your time as a teacher for this collection from Spring, your academic work. Nothing anybody's getting rich off of, as I can attest. But I
Yeah.
found it a really engaging piece back when I read it like 9-10 years ago. So I'd encourage you, if you have access to any of the academic databases, to check out Nicole's article, because she really does go into detail. And this was pre-jewelry, but you sort of go into sort of your entire career journey, which I know you've got quite the resume in terms of the experiences that have kind of all led to this. And really, you've taken bits and pieces of your time at tech startups or doing social media marketing and these other types of things and really put them into this business. So when can we expect your online store, your Etsy, your website? Is that coming up the pike soon, or down the pike, I should say?
Yeah, I will be auctioning antique and vintage jewelry. I have a pile of jewelry that's on our photo station down the basement that's waiting on me. Right now, I'm taking a little bit of time to just give myself a reset. I work part time as a lifeguard now, so I anticipate having more of an online sales, be able to buy things from me, read blog content from me sometime this summer, more likely the fall. So I have quite a bit of pieces that I've collected as far as like once I left data and being a data analyst, and then making great money and being miserable and just really getting into what I love. Now I'm in a position to just dive into that, and I want to take a couple of months to just make sure that I'm pulling all that knowledge down into one place where it's accessible and not just a dump.
We all know millennials get a lot of shit, and rightly so, I feel like. But I do feel like also one of the things that does set us apart is we like money. I mean, everybody likes money. Everybody wants to buy fancy jewelry and all of the other things, take their vacations. But I have noticed there is this sort of resistance to this typical 9 to 5. I'm going to do this because I get paid good money and I'm going to live my life on the other side. I know a lot of people that have just taken risks and basically push that money away. And I think that's a great way to operate, to follow your passion in a way where you're building your skill set, which I think you've done really, really well at.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, part of it too, I can't take all the credit because my husband threatened to dump me because I was so unhappy at my old job. So he was like, you're doing this thing, and he's like, you're really miserable. Why are you doing this? I'm like, well, I'm making great money. And he was like, oh, but you're really miserable. Why don't you do something that you like? And I think that is a huge portion of any time we're on any path. If we are trusting that the path is going to reveal itself, and anybody can take that in whatever way that sits with them. But if we are really going to sit there and say, okay, I'm on this journey. I have two paths ahead of me, Robert Frost, which way should I go? I got really, really lucky, and I was really, really particular about who I had around me. Whether it was someone like you, we've had a friendship for God, like 12 years now. My husband is a huge support to me. My best friend was working in Italy and now is in our house, and I can always, consult him. I have a group of girlfriends and a group of other yoga teachers who lift me up, and nobody ever gets anywhere just on their own merits.
Well, Nicole, thanks so much. Whenever you get your website up, we will have you back on to plug it. And it was
Yes,
great learning a little bit about jewelry. I like doing some of these off the beaten path things that aren't just books and movies
love
a
it.
lot of the time. So
Thank you
I
so
will
much
see you
for having
soon.
me.
Of
Yes,
course. Have a good one. We're going to turn to less happy subject matter now, and that is the movie Civil War. If you read the Pamphleteer, which I think just came out about an hour ago, you know that my editor Davis Hunt and I had vastly different opinions about this movie. This was a movie, and as you see, the most important movie event of the year there, that really has been in the zeitgeist for a while. It's from director Alex Garland, who wrote 28 Days Later, Never Let Me Go, made the movie Ex Machina, also made the movie Annihilation, and the 2022 film Men with Jesse Buckley that really didn't go over well with audiences or critics. It was a little bit of a misfire, kind of this Me Too movie that didn't quite connect with audiences. But Garland is back with Civil War, and I think it is the best film that he's ever made. And I will go so far as to say It's also the best directed action movie that I've seen since the heyday of Sam Peckinpah in the 1970s. I would put Alex Garland's direction in this movie above Christopher Nolan's. I would put it above Martin Scorsese's in Killers of the Flower Moon. I would put it above Denis Villeneuve's in the Dune movies. A lot of it is because of the fact that Garland has a way of actually sticking with the camera, showing the space and building tension. So it's not just a bunch of edits for edit's sake. He really understands the environment that he's in. What makes this movie also interesting is that Garland, like Charles Dickens, V.S. Naipaul, Salman Rushdie, other artists before him, is talking about America from an outsider's perspective. So he's really far removed from a lot of these daily culture war clashes that happen. And the irony of this is that from the moment this movie was announced late last year, it's become a culture war flashpoint. As conservatives tend to do, when the trailer dropped, they were saying, oh, Hollywood is planning another movie where conservatives are being killed or conservatives are fascist, and this is an anti-Trump film, and we should hate Hollywood, and it's terrible. There's this weird trend in conservative media that is absolutely pervasive where these cultural commentators will go in and review a movie before they've actually seen it just to get some likes to continue their grift. And it's very, very, very annoying. The other side of the coin here is that a lot of the leftist media were really happy about it because of the fact that, oh, it's an A24 movie and it's about these times. And this is something that really is going to show what might happen in this election year if Donald Trump gets elected again. Well, like any great piece of art, the movie doesn't do those things. The movie is actually very critical of those things. The central motif of this film, which follows essentially a war reporter, photographer, played by Kirsten Dunst, and kind of this ragtag team of journalists from Reuters and the New York Times, as they go to try to interview the president. They take a road trip to Washington, D.C. because the forces in the Civil War are marching toward him, and they want to get the interview before he's taken out of the picture and his regime collapses, is that it's a movie about these issues. The central theme, the central motif happens whenever Kirsten Dunst and her protege, Kaylee Spaney, take photos looking at the audience. So they're capturing these images of violence. And the audience is left to question, A, why are we watching these images of violence for entertainment, which is something the movie really does well if you see it in an IMAX situation, or as I did with 4D, where the bullets and the smoke are kind of like flowing around you and you're getting like the air puffs to imitate bullet shots just missing your head. Why is it that this violence is something that we're consuming as entertainment, but also what purpose do the images serve? In a lot of ways, Garland goes out of his way to thwart any easy political reading of the film. So for example, in the movie, we have the federal government as it is, and it's opposed by the Western forces, which is this weird amalgamation of Texas and California, which obviously the bluest state and the reddest state together, not really in any logical way going to be allies anytime soon, unless LA and San Francisco drop into the ocean. And the Florida Alliance, which is just kind of this independent, sort of like the Butternuts in the Civil War, who just wanted everybody to get the hell off their lawn. So we can't really say like, oh, it's these dirty conservatives that are trying to fight the president and dethrone the government, January 6th insurrection kind of stuff. Not only that, but as the president, Garland casts Nick Offerman, who most of our viewers might realize is Ron Swanson, the libertarian from Parks and Recreation. But Offerman also has had a very successful career. I saw him at the Ryman about 5 years ago, a show I didn't particularly like because I thought a lot of the commentary and the jokes were too easy because they were just so obsessed with Donald Trump. But he's really made a career as sort of this leftist comedian that really intervenes in politics. Very similar to Michael Ian Black, if you read his article of this week about John F. Kennedy and what your country should do for you. So he's an entertainer that has really sort of made a bunch of political statements. So we're looking at Offerman, and some viewers are looking at him as Ron Swanson, this libertarian hero, and some are looking at him as this liberal comedian commentator who has really made a career making jokes out of politics, and especially jokes out of Trump. So it's hard to just say, oh, this particular movie, this movie has this political bent and it's just another leftist movie or it's a rightist movie. It's woker based. We can't really do that with Civil War. Not only that, and one of my favorite things about the movie is the way that Garland uses buzzwords to kind of bait the audience. So Kirsten Dunst's character became famous after a photo that she took of the Antifa massacre, which obviously Antifa, Portland, we've seen some of this come up. A lot of people on the left say Antifa doesn't actually exist. A lot of people on the right are obsessed with it. But interestingly enough, he doesn't make any moral judgment about this Antifa massacre. Is Antifa doing the massacring, or was it the federal forces that killed Antifa? Likewise, a lot of the movement toward Washington, D.C. is focused on Charlottesville, which is where the Western Forces base is. And Garland talks about Charlottesville in a way that's completely removed from what happened at Charlottesville in 2017. The good people on both sides flub that Donald Trump made, a line that was in a lot of ways taken out of context in the first place. So Charlottesville is there. Garland's acknowledging it as a place. And a lot of viewers are thinking when they hear that term, it's very loaded. He's going out of his way to diffuse that in the movie. So what is Civil War about then? In some ways, it's a movie about the lost art of journalism. The journalists here are not activists. They're not the kind of bloggers, the Ezra Kleins or the Taylor Lorenzes or even the Sean Hannitys or Tucker Carlsons, even though Tucker Carlson does have a pretty storied career as a war correspondent. These are journalists who are trying to remain objective. And that's a big theme of the movie. And in journalism today, that's anathema. We don't want to remain objective. But this movie really does call attention to the fact, and a lot of critics have faulted it for this, that at least attempting to maintain objectivity, at least trying to seek the truth, trying to reflect the truth, but not intervening, might be a path forward for the type of journalism that's needed in this day and age. But even the journalist characters are compromised. They get a thrill out of this violence, and it's something that Garland doesn't let them off the hook for. In fact, in a movie called Civil War, the most emotional death scenes are caused by the younger journalist, Kaylee Spaney in particular, and some friends that she meets on the road, acting out sort of these Hunter S. Thompson gonzo journalist cosplay fantasies. So this is not a movie that lets any of its characters off the hook at all. So in short, I'd urge everybody to go see Civil War. Go see Civil War on the biggest screen possible, but also go see Civil War if you can at one of these Regal 4DX locations where you're getting the full immersive effect, because there's a weird sense of cognitive dissonance. You're getting the full effect of a blockbuster like Mad Max or Twisters, but the content sort of making you think about why you're watching this movie in the first place. So Civil War, I will say on record that it's my favorite film that I've seen since Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I know Davis would disagree with me on that, but maybe we can have a discussion of the movie on one of our shows at a later date. So Civil War is my pick of the week. It's the biggest movie opening. It's going to be the number one movie at the box office, and by all accounts, it might be a huge blockbuster hit. So in terms of our weekly film rundown this week, that's one that I would highly recommend. But sometimes, because there are so many movies being released in Nashville at any given time, usually a dozen releases, sometimes 16, 18. Some movies fall through the cracks. I can't review them. We don't have the space. We don't have the time. I wanted to point out a movie that's ending this week at the Belcourt called Hundreds of Beavers. I covered it in the rundown a few weeks ago, and it's had a really long, successful run. I saw this movie over the weekend, last weekend, and it's hilarious. It might be a little bit long, but it's really nothing that anyone's ever seen before. It's part Looney Tunes, part Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Guy Madden. It's about a guy who makes Applejack liquor, and essentially these beavers come and destroy his life, and he has to become a fur trapper. And it's great. It's hilarious. I would definitely recommend seeing this film if you get a chance to before it closes Sunday at the Belcourt. But I did want to mention that just because of the fact that I don't feel like I gave this movie its due, unfortunately. And I'm not super happy about that. So that's definitely one that I would recommend checking out. The other big release for me this weekend is Like a Mara. It's a movie that opened up at the Nashville Film Festival, actually. It's got Josh O'Connor in it. And he plays an archaeologist who falls in with some antiquity thieves on a dig. And it's a movie about meaning. It's a movie about time. It's a movie about myth. This is another one that I feel like just immersing yourself in would be a great use of a rainy Saturday evening. So this movie's playing at the Belcourt and AMC Thoroughbred 20. Another recommendation from me. The Belcourt's also got some nice restored classics and midnight movies coming up this weekend. One is Andrei Tarkovsky's Nostalgia, not as well known as his bigger films like Solaris or Stalker, but one that I feel like also deserves a restoration. I've not actually seen this movie, so I'm excited to see that the Belcourt has got this wonderful restoration available this weekend. It's basically about an academic on sabbatical and this kind of weird conspiracy theory guy, and then this woman he becomes obsessed with. And this is made in Soviet Russia. It's actually made in Italy, but by a director from Soviet Russia. So there's a lot of tensions from its era that play out, and it's also just wonderfully, beautifully shot, as you can see. Tonight at the Belcourt, for the midnight movie, there's a film called Cemetery Man, which is one of the kind of last great Italian horror movie epics. And as you can tell, it's age restricted on YouTube. Geneva just found that out as well. But it stars Rupert Everett, who you might realize is the best friend in the movie My Best Friend's Wedding, the gay best friend. And he plays a guy in charge of a cemetery where the dead just won't stay dead. So that's a movie that is incredibly well done and pretty rare to see. So I'm looking forward to that being offered at the Belcourt tonight. And then one of my all-time favorite movies, The Fly, David Cronenberg's The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, is playing on Saturday. So if you've not seen The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, I would definitely recommend checking that out as well. We also have a couple of horror movie offerings that are playing wide this week. One is called Arcadian, and it's a post-apocalyptic family drama starring Nicolas Cage. I don't know what happened to Nicolas Cage over the last 3 or 5 years, but every movie that he's made just, well, not every movie, let's be honest, but he's picking these projects now after years of not being very selective, as we talked about on the show when the movie Dream Scenario came out, to making these really great independent films. It started a few years ago with the movie Mandy. It's continued through Dream Scenario and the movie Pig. So this film follows a dad and his 2 twin boys, and by day they have this wonderful pastoral life. By night they're hiding from some kind of evil entities that have destroyed the world. The reviews for this are like 94% fresh, so this should be playing really at every single multiplex this weekend. It might be worth checking out if you've seen Civil War and want to have another dystopia on your hands during the weekend. That would be great. The other movie I wanted to mention, I'm not going to vouch for this and say that it's going to be any good, but it's a movie called Sting. And it's about a little girl who has a pet spider, and the spider starts mutating, and it turns into this evil creature that wants to kill everybody. Why I'm saying it's worth it. First of all, it's gotten some pretty solid reviews. It is currently certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes as of before we began the show today. But the monster is all practical effects. It's all puppetry, rubber. So this isn't just some kind of lazy CGI horror flick that's going on. The practical effects are getting a lot of really good notices. This is one that I'm definitely, if I don't make it this weekend, I'm probably going to check out at some point. So we have a lot of offerings, even though we're kind of in between major releases right now. So this will be a great weekend as we're sort of waiting for the weather to figure out if it's going to be spring or winter to check out a movie or two. Again, Civil War, pick of the week, but we got lots of other offerings too. So that is the end of our weekly film rundown and our show. So whatever you get up to over the next couple of days, give it some thought and have a good one.